This is Kari Kampakis, and you're listening to the Girl Mom Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to share with you an interview with one of my favorite author friends. She is the best, and most of you probably know her already, either as a New York Times bestselling author of books like Sparkly Green Earrings and Nobody's Cuter Than You, or as a co-host of the wildly popular Big Boo podcast. Melanie and her co-host, Sophie Hudson, are the BFFs we all want, and they are as real, funny, and down-to-earth as it gets. I've always had great admiration for Melanie, and recently that admiration quadrupled after I had the privilege of reading and endorsing her latest book, Here Be Dragons, Treading the Deep Waters of Motherhood, Mean Girls, and Generational Trauma, which launches February 18th. This is the book that girl moms everywhere had been waiting for, and I can tell you already that it's going to be a massive hit. Melanie's life story reads a little bit stranger than fiction, and as I learned about all the things that she's been through, both the emotional trauma that her mom inflicted and the trauma that her daughter Caroline experienced through Mean Girls in high school, I found myself crying for her 1 minute and then laughing a few pages later as her trademark humor came through. I know this wasn't an easy book to write, yet she did it for us to remind us of God's goodness and His ability to redeem any horrible story. And I'm so thankful that Melanie listened to God's call to bravely share a story that I know will transform lives and families in ways they desperately need. Melanie and her husband Perry live in San Antonio, Texas with their daughter Caroline, who is a senior at Texas A&M and recently signed her own book deal to release a teen devotional next August. I'll keep you posted on that as well. And in the meantime, go pre-order Melanie's book through the show notes because you do not want to miss this message that will resonate deep in your heart. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment or a 5-star review wherever you listen and share this episode with friends. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. Well, welcome, Melanie. I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we were just talking about the big game this weekend. Auburn and A&M.
Listen,
brought you to Birmingham.
I don't feel good about it.
You don't?
No, I don't. I never feel good about playing another opponent at a night game in the SEC. Like, I just think anything can happen. Everybody's hyped up.
Yes.
And I know Auburn hasn't had a great season, but I feel like if there's a game where all of a sudden you're like, this was our bright, shining moment, it's when we upset A&M. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, I know. It'll be interesting.
It will.
I'll be watching that game.
I know. So we're excited.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. I know we get to talk through, Instagram and messages, but it's so fun to see you face to face.
I know. I'm
excited. And this book is just amazing. Like
Thank you.
I told you, I feel like I'm in on a secret that nobody knows about except for those of us who endorsed it early. But this is a home run.
Thank you.
It is, it's funny when I was reading it, I was like, this book has so many layers and so many storylines that it was not just you and your mother and you and Caroline, but also Perry's role in there and then Gully and the other adults in your life. Like, there are so many different threads that this is just, it's going to be such a good book for a book club too, because you finish it and you're still like processing it all, but you weaved it together so beautifully.
Thank you.
And I've been thinking about it lately too, just because I think we live in an age where people just are so quick to write off relationships and everything is defined as toxic.
Yes.
And people have really lost sight of how to look at relationships in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Like, when is it worth fighting for something and working through something, and when is something truly toxic?
That's it.
And you just did such a beautiful job. Like, you didn't make any rash decisions in any of the experiences, whether with your mom or your daughter. And that's going to be such a helpful guide for moms today, because I think that's becoming a lost art, is how to think through those situations.
I hope so. I mean, that's really my hope, because I'm like, it's so hard to know, and I feel like now I've had so many younger moms ask me, like, when do you know? Do you put your kid in a new school? Do you completely cut them off? Do you find new groups of friends? And I'm like, those things are so hard to navigate.
Right.
And I'm like, sometimes that's just life. And so it's like, what's the difference between the life skill of you're going to always have difficult relationships no matter what stage of life you're in, and when do you walk away and when do you fight for those? And I think that's the question that everybody is trying to figure out.
Yeah, it is. And we do live in a culture, and I do think a lot of the moms, because I get a lot of emails from moms behind us, that there's just a mentality of cutting things off early. And I'm like, don't do it, especially, unless there's a big reason, because I'm like, a lot of these a lot of times girls can come back around.
Yeah.
And something might blow up in middle school, but they might become friends again, and then you've cut off your friendship with somebody you were friends with for 20 years.
That's it. Yeah.
You know, and then what are you going to do when they're back together? But like I said, you just have such a good, it was just such a well thought out process.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So first let's start with the title, which is awesome, and the cover is amazing.
Thank you.
So what inspired the title for this?
So really the title came to me first, and it was just,
okay.
I had read something years ago that talked about in ancient medieval times when people were going to go explore new lands, and they were taking off, and we didn't have Google Maps or Apple Maps to tell us there's a 20-minute delay here. You would just take off blindly. And so when there was a part of the map where they thought there could be danger, or they were going to encounter the unknown or something like that, they would mark it in Latin with the phrase, "Here be dragons."
Oh, funny.
Which was just like a warning of there could be danger here. And so I loved that concept of like, here be dragons. And so as I started to think about our lives and the things that we go through, and I thought especially I feel like parenting, because you have no idea. I mean, Sophie and I were even talking about it because we both have college kids now, and we were like, remember how when they were 3 we thought that was so hard?
Right.
And it is.
Right.
But you don't know that at 21 it's just as hard, kind of in a more mentally exhausting way, because the stakes get higher as they get older. And so I think Here Be Dragons just signifies all the things that we face as moms along the way, that we're trying to help our kids face along the way. And you don't know what life is going to bring. So I was like, Here Be Dragons to me signifies, hey, we aren't real sure what's up ahead.
But
so you better be ready. Have your guard up. Have your guard up. Be ready.
Yeah.
Be ready.
And it's so true, because life is a journey. And
It is.
you learn that through parenting. We both have parented more than 20 years. And just because you have you just need to enjoy the good seasons.
That's
because, tomorrow things could change.
Yep.
And you could enter a new season and things could be very different.
It's so true.
More
and
dragons.
I think that's more dragons. And there's always going to be more dragons. I
Right.
think that's the whole thing. It's like you've got to learn how to fight your dragons, because you don't ever get, now, we're in our 50s, and it's not like you're like, well, they're done. I'm done with all the dragons.
Right.
There's always going to be new dragons to face. So it's, how do we navigate those? How do we help our kids navigate those? And then ultimately, how do we heal from those after we faced them?
So this book was a lot about your healing process.
Yeah.
And I know that you've said that this was not the book that you planned to write when you signed a contract.
No.
And, Sophie said it in her endorsement that people were going to see a new side of you. And that's what I thought. I was like, Melanie is always so happy and functional. Like, how on earth? I'm reading your life story. And I'm like, I want to go hug her right now. Like,
sweet.
I'm serious. I was like, I could cry thinking about some of the things that you went through with your mom. I know there was a mental illness there, but it just broke my heart for you. But then I'm like, wow, you're such a powerful witness to give this story, because you did do the hard work of getting to a healthy place and doing that healing and doing that work. But so I'm assuming you probably planned to write the story. Was it based maybe on the Storytellers Live podcast? I know that got a great response.
That was kind of the beginning.
Okay.
Like I had kind of envisioned when I first signed the contract to write this book, I thought what it was going to be is the story of Caroline kind of dealing with mean girls in high school and what that looked like. Because after that Storytellers Live podcast, so many people had questions, and they were like, that was so encouraging to see. Because I think when you're in the middle of it, you can't envision that you're going to come out on the other side of it,
right?
Because it just feels like this is never going to end.
Yes.
So I thought the book was going to be that, and then about my transition into being an empty nester, because Caroline was off at school. And I knew that I had always known, I think, from the time I started writing books, that I was like, someday I will tell the story of my mom and what I grew up in, but I didn't know when that time was going to be.
Right.
Because I'd always joked and said the title of that book was going to be Now That Everybody's Dead. Like that was going to have to be, like, when can
that might be the next book.
That may be the next book, Now That Everybody's Dead. So it was kind of, but it was just, it's amazing to me, and I've seen this with a couple of my books, where God works out the timing in ways that you could not have imagined, because I didn't know when I signed the contract the way life was going to change to allow me to be able to tell this story at that time. And I don't think until I even started writing it that I realized the ways that my story impacted Caroline's story and how those were all woven together. Sometimes it takes the writing it out, where you're like, oh, here's the thread of all of this.
Yes.
And that's where Sophie really helped me, because the English teacher in her, she was like, here's your theme. And I was like, oh, yeah, there's the thread.
Yeah.
I see
and
it.
I think that's so important, because that's one thing I learned from my last 2 mom books was I wrote Love Her Well, and then the next book was More Than a Mom. And I was nervous about that one because I was like, my first 2 books were for teen girls.
Yeah.
The third one was for your relationship with teen girls. Moms are so quick to buy something for their daughter or something that they think will help their relationship with their daughter. But then the last one was about mom getting in a good place.
Yeah.
And I was like, moms don't see the connection. It is very hard for a lot of people to make that connection. Like, it's worth healing yourself and taking those steps, because you're not going to be the best mom you can be.
That's it.
And I think that's what you did such a great job of doing. And so I guess you said you uncovered that as you were writing that about Caroline's experience.
It was, and I think it's the grace of God that He kind of shows you things. And to me, the thing that I've learned, and I will say, writing this book, and I'll be very honest, like, writing this book is the thing that finally sent me to therapy. You know, like,
that's awesome.
because it brought up so many things. And what you realize is I had healed from them, but I hadn't fully processed a lot of it. You know, you're still like kind of processing and dealing, because I think once you become a mom, it's the whole thing. Moms never put the oxygen masks on ourselves. You know, like, we're like the flight attendants. We're getting everybody else situated, and we're not thinking about ourselves. And so writing it made me realize some places where maybe I still needed to heal a little bit, and where I needed to trust God a little bit more, and how different things had impacted me maybe in a way that I hadn't realized. But I think it also made me realize how much you have to deal with your own stuff and get healthy, because you're just going to repeat those unhealthy patterns if you don't acknowledge where they took place in your own life.
Yeah. So can you give an example of what you realized that you had to heal in yourself, or otherwise it would hurt Caroline?
I think one of the things early on for us that I started to realize when she was, is I was so, what was hurting me is because I knew from the time I was going to have a daughter that I was like, I am going to do this so much better. Like, I'm going to be so intentional, and I want us to have a healthy relationship, and I don't want to bring any of the dynamics that I had with my mom into this relationship. And so it was processing through that. But I think that what started to happen, and especially it kind of raised its ugly head, I feel like, when she started kindergarten, where I was trying so hard to be the perfect mom all the time.
Oh, got it.
That it almost became too much, where I was overcompensating for everything, and I was trying to be this perfect mom, which kind of in a way translated to her, I didn't want her to feel any pain or any discomfort, or you know, I was micromanaging, because I was like, we're going to make everything here so great,
give you the great childhood.
That's it. We're going to give you a magical childhood. And the thing is those are the very things that God uses in our kids' lives, where they do have to face some adversity, and they do have to have some hard times, and they do have to have things that are going to happen, and we can't protect them. And I was going to drive myself crazy trying to protect her from all of them. And trying to manage all of those, because God was like, no, you're going to have to surrender. And I think even now, with her being a senior in college, all the ways, I mean, I feel like that's been my word for the last year, is like, God is like, no, you've got to surrender it. Like, you've got to quit trying to fix it, or to make this thing better, or, you know, I can stay up all night worrying, because that's what we do.
That's right.
But you know what? It does not one bit of good. I mean, you know.
I know.
And a lot of times as moms, I think they call us and they dump everything on us, and then we stay up all night, and then they call us and they're like, and guess what? I just went to a formal, and then I had a Chi semi-formal, and then I did whatever, and their life is great. And you're like, well, I haven't slept in 3 days.
That's right. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'm worrying, and then I look at Harry and he's snoozing away. And I'm like, okay, you're going to live to be 100, and I won't worry myself to an early grave.
That's it.
That's so
and
funny.
Perry, like my husband has always said, because Caroline's our only child, and he is all the old school of like, you got to have hard knocks. And he's like, I'm glad this happened. He was like, I'm glad it happened. It's shaping her. It's making her tough. It's making her resilient. Like, it's giving her grit. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just making my stomach hurt. It's giving me an ulcer. So I'm glad that you were so happy about it. I am not really a fan.
Yeah, so. I know. You know, something else, your story reminded me, I have a friend that went through it was a divorce situation years ago, but she's got a similar, just the sweetest peacemaking personality like you do. And she, I mean, I think she fought for her marriage probably longer than most people would. It went a long time. But somebody said something afterward that I just clarified it so correctly. They were like, I've never seen somebody give someone such a soft place to land. And she tried everything. And her ex just would not admit mistakes. It was just a bad situation. So she had to leave. But it made me think of your situation that you gave your mom as many chances as possible. And, she just kept, ruining big days and just being intentionally hurtful. But one thing I loved about your story, too, and I think this is its own storyline, is the marriage component and Perry coming into your life.
Yes.
Because I said, he reminds me of Harry. Like, he's a man of logic. I think Perry seems to be a man of logic. Just can cut to the chase. And I can be trying to describe something in 200 words, and then he has like a sentence. And I'm like, yes, that's it.
That's what I was trying to say.
What I was trying to say. Yeah. And it seems to me, how old were you when you met Perry?
I was 22 when we met and 26 when we got married.
Okay. So it seems to me what you had been trying to figure out for 22 years about your parents to say who's lying, who's trustworthy, that Perry figured it out in like 2 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
Because you said when he met your mom and your dad, that was your moment of clarity.
It was.
When he was able to say. I thought that was so fascinating that you could not see.
Because I think when you grow up in something, and it's your parents, and so, even though I knew what my mom was to an extent, I do think, I've thought about this a lot, that I do think God protects kids in a lot of ways, because I think there were things that I'm glad I didn't see earlier, because how would that have affected me? And one of the things that my college friends and I used to always joke about is a lot of times what you grew up in seems so normal to you that you don't realize it's not normal till you're out of it. And then you're like, oh, like I vividly remember being in college and having a conversation where I was like, so your mom didn't stay in bed all day. Like it just, like I really thought, oh, that's what moms, they just stay in bed all day.
Oh, wow.
I just thought that was normal. Like, well, she didn't have a job, and so she just stayed in bed all day. She slept. Right. So you don't know a lot of that stuff. And so it was interesting to have Perry come in at 22. And, I had told him from my perspective, this is my family dynamic. This is my mom and her husband. This is my dad and his wife. This is how this all happened. This is whatever. And like from the first time he met my dad and stepmom in particular, he was like, I will never forget. We went back and we were sitting on my couch in my apartment. He was like, I don't think you know the whole story. He said, the people that I just met, that does not, reconcile to what you've been told to me. And it was funny because as soon as he said it, I started thinking about it, and I was like, my mom had always, in a lot of ways, tried to paint my dad as like kind of this absentee dad, or like that he had walked out on us. But I was like, but he came to see us every single weekend. Like he, and stayed at his parents' house, which, as an adult, you're like, well, that's true love. If you're going to go stay as a grown up, if you're going to go stay at your parents' house, who they turned off their air conditioning at night, I'm like, he really loved us to come do that every single weekend and put his life on hold. So I was like, oh, that doesn't add up.
Right. And it's kind of like you had that sense deep down in your gut, but you needed it articulated.
But you can't fathom, I think when you operate in a certain way, you can't fathom, like my mind couldn't wrap around, so my mom just had lied about all of that. Right. Even though I'd kind of suspected it at times, it's hard to think about that. Like you can't really fathom it. And I still can't. Like it's interesting to me, when I think about like anything, I've always told Perry, I'm like, if anything ever happened between the two of us, I would never try to turn Caroline against him. You know, like that. Why would I want to destroy her like that to vilify her dad? I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, I think when you bring somebody in who all of a sudden sees the situation for a new situation with fresh eyes, without the emotional entanglements, it's like, oh, this is not, you were correct. This is not what I thought it was.
Yeah. And I think that was like such a testament of a lot of people are in these situations and they can't see any good and they can't see God's hand in it. And I think that's just like one of the many examples of how God was so good to you, that's how God spoke to you in a lot of ways, was through the people. Yeah. Whether it's Perry or Gully, I think you said you were close with Gully's mom. Yeah. The love that he brought into your life and the healthy people he brought into your life that you could trust to help you. Because I mean, I've never been through anything like that, but I know when I've gone through hard things, it's like I have to really rely on the people I trust because my brain is foggy. And so you've got to have healthy-minded people around you that, like, I don't know what to decide, and they kind of almost have to make those decisions for you. Yeah. And that's such a grace from God to have that.
Oh, I don't know how you get by in life. Like, I think you've got to have your circle of people that can see things clearly, that can remind you, because I think when you're in the middle of a hard time, it's hard to remember maybe what God has done before. Yes. You know, and I think even this last year, you know, we've kind of gone through some hard times, and Perry has said, where he's like, why would you not think God's writing a better story? He's like, he's always writing a better story. But it's like when you're in the midst of it, it's just hard to see it because you're like, well, but this was what I wanted, and this is look this way. So you need those people. And I think when you look in the Bible, to me, that's so interesting. Like when I think about now, like Moses fighting the battle and needing Aaron to hold up his arms. And, you know, you just see so many examples where God always gave Jonathan and David, where he's like, you've got to have a person to help you see things clearly, because I think your brain can play tricks on you for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so great about your book. It's just, it's a guide for healthy relationships because we live in an age, as I think Pope Francis has called it, of disposable relationships where people are just quick to write people off. And I'm just like, you know, you're going to end up with no relationships if you write off everybody. Like, you've got to have.
Yeah.
So you also, I wanted to talk about, like, tell me some more about Caroline's story and her story of fighting some mean girl stuff in high school.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because now you look back on the perspective of it, and maybe this will be an encouragement to moms who are in the thick of it right now, because I look back, and Caroline would even say now, she's like, I'm so thankful for my sophomore year. Like, as hard as it was, she was like, God taught me so many lessons in that year about what to expect for myself, about where to stay strong, of knowing that I can make it on my own, of knowing what it's like to decide to walk away from a toxic relationship. You know, so you look and go, okay, God, I see you were doing something. Even at the time, I was like, why? You know, because I think you envision, you know, and I don't know why, because it's probably not most of our high school experiences, but what you envision is it's going to be magical and it's going to be great and you're going to have this great group of friends. And I think with social media, you see it and it looks like everybody is, here's a group of 20 kids all going to homecoming together, and it's so wonderful. And it's funny because even I have a friend now, and her daughter's a senior in high school, and it was her last homecoming, and she was like, I know that I need to, you know, it's so hectic and it's chaotic, but I know I need to treasure it because I'm going to miss it. And I was like, I'm going to be honest, I don't miss it. I said it was exhausting. Like, it was, I'm glad we had it. It was fun. Yeah. But it's a lot to navigate.
Yeah.
So with Caroline, you know, it's funny because I thought we got through junior high pretty unscathed. And so in my mind, I was like, I don't know why everybody thinks this is so hard. Like, we're great. We've got a good little group of friends. I mean, Caroline was never a kid that was like necessarily in like the cool popular crowd, but she had a group of like steady friends. And that's all I ever wanted for her. Was I was like, I don't care about popularity.
Exactly.
I don't care
Fly
about
under the radar.
That's it. Just let's just have good, safe friends. And so I think that's why I was so surprised sophomore year. And I'd had a couple of older moms tell me that they were like, now there's a shift. You need to know when they all start to get their driver's license, there's a shift because people are going to go one direction and other people are going to go another direction. And it just gives them a little more freedom. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. And we're like you. I mean, we live in a neighborhood where it's like everybody goes to the same kindergarten, the same elementary school. There's one high school. So you're not, your groups don't change a lot. You know, you're not having this influx of new kids. So sophomore year, it started, I always say that the metaphor for that was she was playing in a soccer game like 2 weeks before her sophomore year started, and she got hit in the nose so hard with a soccer ball and immediately had a bloody nose. And I was like, that ended up being a metaphor for her whole sophomore year. Like, I didn't know when she took that hit to the face that it was like God physically showing me, like, buckle up. Because,
so now when you see a soccer ball, is it like PTSD?
It is, because it really was one of those. She had just gotten her braces off. So, I mean, we had just, the new teeth, the whole thing. And I watched the soccer ball hit, and I was like, what? Like, you're kind of like, I don't even care if she broke her nose because we can fix that, but tell me what's happening with the teeth. Did we lose a tooth? But it just, you know, and just look back, you look back, and I think what's so hard as a mom, and I think this is the question that I get, is like, you don't want to be the mom who thinks your daughter is innocent in all of it.
Right.
Where she's just a victim. And here's the thing, that I know that that's not the case. You know, like there are dynamics and there are things. And I've always said the thing with Caroline is she's an 8 on the Enneagram. She is strong-willed. She's a truth teller. I've always said her personality did not translate well to the high school girl economy. You know, where she's going to speak her mind and she's going to say what she thinks, and she doesn't know how to play the games and not say it. And so that added a layer of complications. But to watch, and you know, and even now I look back and I'm like, what started it? You know, and I think it started where it's like somebody liked this boy and this boy liked Caroline, and then they're just, you know, it just became all these little pieces where every day it was like she would get in the car and tell me, and I'd be like, I'm trying to figure out like what is going on, like what is happening. But as it began to evolve, like so many, I think this is the problem with high school girls too, is I think sometimes they don't have the maturity.
Yes.
I think they like the drama. I think there's something in them that they like that drama. And I think that's why you have this friend group and all of a sudden somebody's out and you don't understand why they're out. And that's what we watched happen to Caroline, where it was like...
And I've read before, Lisa D'Amour has said that it can be very bonding for a group to target one girl, that it's actually to create a common enemy. And she said, especially when girls don't have the maturity to come together around positive interests, that's sometimes how they bond, is by kind of attacking one girl.
Yes.
And I'm like, she nailed it. That happens so often.
It happens so often.
Yes.
And I think it's why all of a sudden you're like, why did this happen? And
right.
And I think the problem is too... And I had been guilty of this, is I think as moms, when it's not your daughter, sometimes you don't even realize it's happening.
Right.
And so you're not even aware. Like you may all of a sudden notice, well, this girl isn't around anymore,
right.
but you don't know what's going on the other side. So
right.
we kind of stay in our little bubble. And so when I started to watch it happen to Caroline, and I kept saying, well, can you not talk to them? Can you sit down and say like, hey, what happened here? Like what? And they wouldn't talk to her. I mean, they wouldn't.
They just cut her out.
They just cut her out. And then it was like, then there were a couple of girls who acted like they were still her friend, but then they accidentally had her on a group text where she saw the things that they were saying about her behind her back. And
Melanie.
it was just...
But in the blessing, that's probably when you're also like, I'm glad God made her strong.
Yes, yes.
Like a lot of girls couldn't survive that.
That's it. And it was, and there's so many things, and as a mom, I look back because I think you hear all the kids where this ends tragically, and where it destroys their life and they
right.
never recover. And so it's so scary.
Yes.
Because there were nights, and it's hard to, now I look back and from the perspective of now, and it feels like, but at the time I remember being so afraid of like, what is this going to do to her? Like, how
right.
is this affecting her? Like, is this going to be something that stays with her the rest of her life? Is she ever going to get past it? Because it just feels like it's never ending. And it finally got to the point, and the thing is this is where Perry, again, my husband, because he and Caroline have very similar personalities. They view the world very similarly, whereas I'm a peacemaker. So I kept just saying, try to talk to him. Let's kill him with kindness. Let's just keep being their friend.
Keep throwing them cotton balls.
It's all going to be fine, and... She came home, and there was a day where one of the girls, which ironically was a girl who had kind of been on the fringe, and Caroline had really brought her in. She felt bad for her and had brought her into this group. And this was the girl that began like this just campaign against Caroline.
And it's funny. I've heard of that happening a lot.
Yes.
Yes. And it just takes one.
That's it.
It just takes one to change the whole dynamic.
And it did. She changed the whole dynamic of the group. And it just got so toxic. And there was a day that Caroline came home, and this girl had cornered her in the bathroom and had called her so many horrible names, and then had sent her a text that we had screenshots of, a text that basically said, I will tell any lies I need to tell about you. What? I'm going to say that you did all these things. I'm going to say that you're this kind of person. I'm going to blow up your life. I mean, it was...
Why?
I
still don't know.
I still don't know. It just was such a... and she was admitting on the text, like, I will tell whatever lies I have to tell. Yeah. And I told Caroline, I said, here's the good thing. I said, because you aren't doing any of those things, I said, it stands for itself. I said, because it's not like she's going to have pictures of you doing anything. People know who you are. You've never even had a boyfriend at this stage. So, like, she can try to paint these pictures of you, but, there again, our community's small. So people know who you are. So you're just going to have to take the high road. There again. But that day when she came home and the girl had cornered her in the bathroom, Perry looked at Caroline, and she was sitting on the bed, and she was crying, and she was like, I'm just at my limit. And she's not a crier, so that's the other thing where you're like, this...
If she's there,
this is bad.
Yeah.
And Perry looked at her, and he said, we are done. And he goes, this is war. He said, it's time for you to fight back. And I watched. It's really interesting, and I think it's a good thing for us to remember as parents, because... that feels aggressive, but it was what she needed to hear, because it was okay for her to stand up for herself, and she didn't have to just take it. And he said, if she corners you again, he said, I don't care if you punch her in the face. I'll come meet you in the principal's office. Listen, I'm not advocating that.
Right, no.
But it empowered her.
Yes,
like, it empowered her to be like, it's okay for me. I don't have to just take this.
Right.
I can stand up.
Yes.
And so what ultimately ended up happening was this girl cornered her again. Well, first of all, I reached out to the mom and said, have you seen these texts? And she said, yeah, I've seen them. It's just girls being girls.
Are you serious?
And I was like, no, this is not, this is next level.
Right.
Like, I can't, like, I still can't wrap my mind around that because.
And you're not helping your child.
No.
By not.
That's it. Yeah. I was like, in what world is this just girls being girls?
Right.
I was like, I know what girls do. If this were just petty, whatever, I would let it go. But this is beyond.
Right.
And so the girl ended up cornering Caroline in the bathroom, and Caroline looked at her and she said, you need to let me walk out. And she said, I'm going to go tell the principal. I'm going to go tell the authorities, and do not talk to me again. And
Good for her.
And the girl kind of looked at her and she was like, nobody's going to believe you. And Caroline's like, we'll see. And she did. And that kind of
her.
set a boundary. And then at that point, I think it began where they just ignored her, which was great.
That's fine.
Just leave us alone, you know. But it goes on for so long. And I think the thing that we all worry about as moms is it's not really about those friendships, because you're like, well, those girls have shown who they are.
Right.
But you're also like trying to help your kid navigate that. And you're trying to see emotionally if they're going to be resilient enough to handle it. And you're trying to help them reason it out when you can't figure out why, you know, like to say, you know, and you're also trying to be honest with yourself where I'm like, did you do something? Is there something you did? Are you contributing to this? Because I always said, I don't want to be this mom who's just like, well, my kid is perfect, because you know how that turns out.
Right. But still, just the way. And, you know, I think I've been thinking about this so much. I think we understand this having older daughters. And I've got a new book for moms coming out in September. And it's really all about light and darkness. It's kind of a continuation of Love Her Well, just preparing your daughter for the real world. Yeah. But I'm like, it's just so interesting because we live in the South. And so we really see this, that there's a lot of emphasis, you know, strong Christian culture. Yeah. And what I see, a lot of the girls who are not prepared for the real world are the sweet little Christian girls. Yeah. You know, because when you've been raised to have manners and to be kind, and, you know, sometimes you're not ready, or you think people are trustworthy because you've been surrounded by trustworthy people, and that's not really reality everywhere you go. So I was like, it's kind of funny because when your kids are little, I'm like, you're sending them to etiquette classes. Yes. And then they get older and you're sending them to self-defense classes.
Yes. It's so true.
You know, but they really do, you know, and I think we can emphasize one or the other. But then, you know, like there's some people that the girl is just so, you know, they have no tact, they have no warmth. Like they can tell people to write people off, but they don't have relationships. So you don't want that. But, you know, you want the kindness, but you got to have the grit too.
That's it.
And even now, especially when moms will tell me, like, oh, my 3-year-old she has a lot of spunk. And I'm like, well, you know what? In this day and age, they need that.
They need it.
They need it.
I mean, they're going to need it. Yeah. And I think there's, you know, and this kind of goes with the title of my book, but I keep seeing this thing, and it's like, don't be afraid to raise dragon slayers in a time where they're dragons.
That's good.
And I'm like, our kids need that.
They do.
And I think as Caroline has gone into college, you know, I think now she'll look back at that sophomore year and she's like, it taught me so many things that I needed to know. Wow. About people and about myself and about what I can get through and about my dependence on God to give me what I needed in that time. Because, you know, I think it's so easy to say, and I feel like it's such a cliche to be like, well, they're just being mean to you because they're jealous. Right. And the thing is, it's not really the jealousy. It's not even that Caroline was this, you know, whatever, and they were jealous of all these things, but it is rooted in all their own insecurities. Yes. And so it doesn't even have to be, but it's somewhere in them where they're needing to pick somebody apart to either feel bonded with some other girls or to, you know, find their own place in the hierarchy or whatever it is. And so sometimes it's helping your daughter realize this isn't even about you. Like it feels like it's about you because you're the target. You're just you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yes.
And I think I've heard it before too, that, you know, you're not going to thrive in every season of life. And it's important for girls to know that. And it was fun to see her going to college, and I know she has thrived in college. And you know, when you do have those bad relationship experiences, those are often the girls who really are great friends after when they find their people. Yes. Because they're so appreciative. When you have had that lack of friendship, that you're just so appreciative to have it that you're not going to take it for granted.
And I really see that in Caroline. Like she is such, one of her core characteristics is she is so loyal to her people. Like if you are one of her people, she will go to the ends of the earth for you. Like that is just who she is. And she has a great group of girlfriends now. But I think there is that appreciation that she didn't have. And I also kept telling her, the other thing I think when your daughter's in high school too is it is an emotional capacity component. Right. And I think when girls get to college, everybody's a little more mature. Yes. I think your pool gets a little larger, so you get to meet people and have a fresh start. Yes. You get to meet people that have maybe some of your same interest and not just who you happen to be raised with. Right. So it helps you find friends that maybe value the same things you value. I mean, one of the things Caroline said, A&M has, it's called Impact Camp, and it's like a freshman orientation camp, but it's all church-based.
Okay.
So it's a Christian, so it's, voluntary, but you sign up. And so she went to Impact before her freshman year, and that was life-changing for her, where she had grown up in the church, and she had grown up in the faith, and we had raised her in all those ways. But the thing that she said that hit me so hard when she got in the car, when I picked her up after it was over, and she said, I didn't think there were really kids my age who had deep faith. She said, I thought that was a myth because she had never really experienced that.
Right.
And she said, but to see kids who like value the same things I value and are going to make the same decisions that I'm going to make, and because it's based on their love for God and wanting to have an impact.
Yes.
That was life-changing to be able to make friends from that pool.
Yes.
As opposed to where she had been.
I mean, that's what I tell girls when I'm speaking is like, you want those, like, those are the friendships that are going to last 30 or 40 years.
That's it.
Because I talk to a lot of people who have the kind of friendships that maybe Caroline had in sophomore year, and they're like, I'm not friends with my high school friends anymore.
No.
I don't have long-term friends. And so you want it, if it's not going to work out, if it's not a good thing, you don't want it to keep going.
No.
It doesn't feel like a blessing at the time.
It doesn't. And I think that what you start to realize, too, is it's okay. One of the gifts, and it was funny because I would like to say, like, after sophomore year, the rest of Caroline's high school experience was great and wonderful. It wasn't. It was fine. It was never as bad again, but it was lonely at times. And it was like we kind of had friends that I always felt like were placeholder friends, where I'm like, they're fine, but I don't think that they're going to really ever see each other again after graduation.
Right.
They weren't that kind of friendships.
Right. The chemistry
was, it was kind of more of a, this is somebody to go to the football game with or whatever. But I think when I look back at that season, one of the sweet things it did is I was like, because she did spend so many Friday and Saturday nights at home alone, was it bonded us as a family in a way that I think we wouldn't have if she had been out and doing all the things and with her friends all the time. So I'm like, there's still a sweetness in it. You just have to find kind of the silver lining.
Yes.
Because there were a lot of Friday and Saturday nights where I felt sad because I was like, well, she's sitting here on the couch with us and that doesn't feel right. It feels like she ought to be out. But now I'm like, well, it saved her from probably getting in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And it made us all close in a way that we still are. So there's there's a gift in it.
Well, and I tell girls that too, that I'm like, I know very few girls who make it to college without a lonely season. And I'm sure it's the same thing in boy world. Like, because moms, even just because kids and like moms of kids who nobody would guess that about them, that they're in a very popular crowd. Like, oh yeah, he's gone through a hard season or lonely season. But I think they all do to some extent. But I have so many moms who they've been through situations like Caroline had, and they say that the silver lining was that we got to be really close.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell moms. I was like, it's, you can't control what's happening on the outside, but you can bring love into your home.
It's so true.
And that's something I think that I bet it was probably a saving grace for Caroline, is that you have such a good support system and your long-term friends, like, like you do. You seem to have like a lot of my best friends like from 20 or 30 years ago, and it seems like that's kind of what you and Perry have too.
Yeah.
And that, I just think that has such a big impact on kids having a sense of security when their friendships are shaken up.
That's it. And I think it shows them, because I think Caroline had always said, like, my best friend Gully, who I met in college, she was always like, I want to have my Gully. And I'm like, but we didn't meet till we were 19 years old. We were in college.
Right.
Like, this was not a childhood friend. This was a season of life. And now I think she sees where she's got those own people in her life.
Right.
But I'm like, sometimes that doesn't happen till college.
Yes.
But I do think it's good in terms of, and I think that's what's tricky, because I had a mom, and I think I write about this in the book, where like a year after Caroline graduated, I was talking to a mom who had a younger daughter. And I said, well, Caroline's high school experience was terrible. And she was like, what? And she was like, I had no idea. And she was like, she was captain of the soccer team. She was, she was involved in all these things. She was smart. And I was like, so you never know what somebody's dealing with, because those aren't the things we're going to put on Instagram. We're not, that's not on social media. Right. You're waiting till you do have the photo op.
Yes.
But nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
So I think there are a lot more girls out there struggling
definitely
than we realize.
Yeah. I mean, I hear it I hear it in little towns where they have 8 girls in the grade.
Yeah.
And then in towns where they might have 30 schools going into the same church youth group. But it's the same. And even it's been kind of, even I hear from moms that their kids go to a great little Christian school, but they're like, our school, it's so academically
Yes.
challenging. It's so competitive. The girls cannot be kind to each other.
That's it.
And I'm like, is it really worth it? You know?
I know.
It's just,
I know.
it's so sad.
But I think that's why, when I've had moms say, well, at what point did you ever think about pulling her out of school? Or did you ever? And we did. I mean, there were
Right.
times that we thought, do we move her to a different school?
Right.
But I think that's you have to gauge what your child's resiliency is and how bad it is.
That's
because
good. I like that.
Once you go, you're just removing them from a situation, and you don't know that the same situation, or not worse, is going to happen
Right.
somewhere else. So
Right.
sometimes it's better to teach them how to stay and advocate
Yes.
and kind of get through it, because I think it does develop some grit and some perseverance and some character. Because I think as much as we want to remove them, I always laugh from Finding Nemo when, the
crush?
dad, when the dad's, no, it's Marlin is talking about
Marlin.
Nemo, and he's like, well, I just didn't want anything to happen to him. And Dory's
Yes.
like, well, if nothing ever happened to him, then nothing's ever going to happen to him. And I thought as moms, that's how we are. We're like, we just want to keep him in this little
Yes.
insular bubble. And I'm like, but then they're not developing all these
The
things.
skills.
And I think it's given Caroline, especially now, it's like now she's written this book that talks so much about this and how God carried her through it. And I'm like, if she hadn't been through it, then she wouldn't have this story, and she wouldn't have this empathy for girls that are dealing with it.
Yeah.
So
now we know this as writers. It's all material. She's got good
That's
material.
it. That's
She's
it.
got more material than the average 22-year-old.
That's it. Whether you
Well,
want
I
it
was
or
just
not.
sitting there thinking about that. I was like, man, this is what equips her to write a devotional. If she'd had a perfect life, then
You wouldn't-
nobody relates to that.
That's it.
But
It's
yeah.
like you've got to have a story.
Yeah, and
So,
she's going to find more girls, sadly, relate to that
I
than she
know.
thinks.
That's what I think.
So seeing Caroline and her resilience as she was fighting her dragons, did it help you with your situation with your mom? Was there a correlation there, or were things kind of happening at the same time?
It was funny because I think with my mom, when I made the decision to cut her out of my life when Caroline was 6.
Okay,
So that
got
happened
it.
long before all of this.
Got it.
But I think what I realized is if I hadn't have learned how to deal with my mom in a healthy way, because I had to learn how to advocate for myself, and I had to learn when enough was enough. I had to get healthy and have Caroline and I have a healthy bond, because I think the other thing that can happen with mean girls and their moms is that there can become a fake bond there over a common enemy. I think as moms,
yes.
I've seen moms where they get too piled into the girl drama.
That's good,
And
yes.
feed the girl drama, because it creates kind of this bond between
right.
their daughter and them.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I thought, I can't hop on this roller coaster.
Right.
And so you realize how much having to deal with my own emotional wounds and healing from those, even though I couldn't make Caroline's better, it kind of gave me the tools to help her navigate it.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
And how did you, and it might be just your personality, like how did you, I guess with all of the stuff with your mom, I mean, she ruined your wedding day. I mean, she did there's a lot of stuff in this book. Like whoever's listening, go get this book. Like it's crazier than fiction. But what kept you from getting bitter? I mean, how did you fight that? Because I think that's what I would struggle with, is feeling bitter or resentful. Because family dynamics are already so tricky. And
They are.
the mother-daughter relationship can be very tricky to begin with.
And I think, I don't know if it's in my nature to be bitter. Like I think some of it is, I tend to always look, and I think I gloss over a lot of stuff. So I don't know that I ever struggled with bitterness. I mean, maybe a little bit. I think especially like I can think about days like moving into college and watching other girls' moms like decorating their room and helping them do all that stuff. And I was like, my mom didn't do any of that. Like she didn't do any of that, or and I think even now there's always a sadness, and I know you lost your mom, but it's like when you don't have a mom, it's a hole.
It is.
When you watch other people and they're taking trips with their moms and they're doing stuff. But I think for me, God had been so faithful to put other people in my life. Like I always say, like when I met Gully, my best friend, she was a freshman at A&M. I was a sophomore at A&M. She's from Bryan College Station, which is the town where A&M is.
Okay.
And so her whole family was there. And so it just got to be a thing where she'd be like, well, you want to go home? I'm going to go back to my house and my mom's cooking.
Oh.
And so her mom really became this surrogate mom to me, and still is. I mean, to this day, like when I show up, I mean, she has made brownies because they're my favorite. She, you know, she always has a little gift for me, you know, like whatever. And so you see the ways, I think when you sit back and you watch the way God is going to give you something maybe in a different way than what you wanted it to look like or thought it was going to look like, but he still finds ways to fulfill those longings in your heart. And I think that the beauty of it too, and I think this is where I can't be bitter, is I think God was so intentional in the fact that I had a daughter. I mean, that I have one child and that she's a girl. And I think sometimes the thing that heals you is getting to be the thing in somebody else's life that you didn't have in your own.
Oh, yeah, I'm about to cry. That's so true. Did you want a daughter, or were you scared to have a daughter?
I think I knew I wanted a child. We had never talked about how many. I knew I wanted a child. I don't know that I'd really thought about it, but I knew, I will never forget the day that I had the ultrasound and they were like, it's a girl. And I was like, oh, this will be interesting. This will be interesting because I think in a way but the daughter just felt like this is going to be a whole dynamic. Like, or am I going to be able to do this in a healthy way? Because I felt like my mom and I always had this dance of it. Always felt like I knew she had this jealousy towards me or this bitterness or this competition. And I thought, I don't want to feel any of those things. Right. And you don't know that you're not, you know. I mean, you know the places where you are fragile or feel insecure. And so, I don't know. It was interesting. So, but I think that God, it's like I've been able to watch him in real time make the story come full circle. And I look at, I think in a lot of ways, I was a much more intentional mom to Caroline than I would have been had I not had the relationship with my mom.
Yes, I can see that. So how did you know, they always say it's hard to be what you don't see. Because I hear from a lot of moms, like, I don't have a relationship with my mom, or like they struggle to love their daughter. It's heartbreaking because they're like, nobody really loved me. Like they didn't get that parental love. So did you kind of have a vision, like, oh, I want to be like Goldie's mom? Or did you have people like that? Or do you feel like it was just the grace of God as far as guiding you and the kind of mom you wanted to be to Caroline?
I think it was both, but I think for me a big thing was watching Gully's mom. Like, really? I will say, like, because Gully's her only child. Okay. So it's funny to see where God, put that into my life.
So intentional.
And to see how close the two of them always were. And in a very real way. I mean, like, we always laugh because when Gully was in college, I can remember hearing her on the phone with her mom, and she would be like, well, I was having a perfectly good day until you called. You know, it was the typical, it wasn't like it was this storybook. Right. It was very normal mother and daughter, where it's like, well, now you're on my nerves, or quit telling me what to do, or I don't want to wear that outfit, or whatever. Right. But it was but there was so much love there. Right. And there was so much tenderness, and to watch the way her mom always wanted to be in a healthy way, like not a cool girl way, but like just wanted to be a part of what we were doing, or would sit and listen to us talk about our boy problems or our life problems or what we wanted to do, and just had food and welcomed us in, and we always felt so loved. And I thought, this is the kind of atmosphere that I want to create. Like, this is the kind of home I want to create. So I do feel like I got to see a real vision of kind of what I wanted to be in a lot of ways. You know, and it is, I'm sitting here thinking how it is also a grace from God that you met Goldie in college when you have a lot of time. If you'd met her at 24, 25, you wouldn't have had, you would be working, not have as much time to spend with her mom. But even when my mom passed away, I was so surprised that, like, so many of my memories were from the teenage years in college. And I'm like, why is that? And I think it's because I was old enough to, like, really remember stuff, and then I was still spending a lot of time with them. That's it. It's like, that was like such an impressionable period of your time to be, like, observing her. It was. And I think that I look back, and there were times that, you know, towards the end of college especially, like, there was a whole summer I lived with Gully's parents, and she didn't. Like, I was just basically, my dad was paying rent in an apartment for me, but I was hilarious. Like, I just wanted to be at their house. Oh, that's because it just felt like home to me. So it kind of gave me such a vision of, like, this is what I want to create, because it's not that it was fancy and it's not that it was perfect, but there was just so much love, and you always knew that there was love. So that really formed a lot for me of kind of the mom that I hope to be someday. Oh, that's so awesome. And there was a Bible verse that you said has kind of been part of your life story. I think it's Lamentations 5:7. Our ancestors sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. So how has that Bible verse played out in your story, or what has that meant to you? I mean, I just think it shows that I mean, generational trauma and sin, I think we want to gloss over it a lot of times, but it's a real thing.
Yes.
Like, I think that there are things that we hand down whether we want to or not. And I tell this in the book, but Perry was on the school board in our neighborhood for 6 years. And that's the neighborhood where he grew up. It's where his family grew up. So he's been there for generations. And he would say there were so many things that you would see these high school kids now struggling with the same alcoholism, whatever that their parents struggled with and that their grandparents struggled with. And it becomes these things, but you pass it down. I think it's really hard sometimes to change something in your family because your family is going to tell you, but this is the way it's always been.
Right.
And you're like, no, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
You know, and I think with my mom, even like her mom, my grandmother, she'd be like, well, Melanie, that's just the way your mom is. Like, she doesn't mean it.
This was the grandmother.
This was my mom's mom. And she would be like, she doesn't mean it. You need to let it go. This is just the way it's always been.
So was that the way her mother had raised her?
You know, I don't know, because that was all before, and nobody talked about it.
Yes.
And I think when I look back now at that family, I'm like, oh, there were so many secrets. There were so many secrets that we kept buried. And I think the secrets, you keep them buried because you don't want to deal with them.
Yes.
And I believe so strongly, even after, spending the last year kind of going to therapy and processing a lot of this, where I'm like, anything that you choose not to feel, you have not really dealt with it. Like I've said, if you haven't felt it, you haven't dealt with it.
Right.
But you kind of have to let yourself acknowledge what it is. Like this isn't, just because it's the way we've always done it, this is not normal. Like this is not the way this behavior should be.
Right.
And so I think that verse in Lamentations, where it's like, don't discount if you see a pattern in your family where you say, I don't want to repeat this thing. And it can be a lot of different things. I think we look at the big things like, alcoholism or, depression or whatever. But it can also be, one of the big things in my family was vanity was a huge thing. Everything for the women, that was a very female-centric side of the family.
Right.
And everything was like, it really didn't matter what your life looked like as long as you didn't gain too much weight and you always looked good. It was, the vanity runs deep. And that's its own kind of toxic thing.
Right.
Where I'm like, we're not going to put this pressure to always be physically perfect. Or, it's a wonder that more of us didn't develop eating disorders. Or whatever. Because, I can remember.
And I think that's common for that generation. And sometimes I wonder, is it because like girls really depended on their looks? You had to get married to have a good life. Like they didn't have the career opportunities and it just got handed down. I don't know. Like sometimes I watch some of the old shows that it was really about being perfect and fitting into that tight antebellum dress or
That's
whatever.
it. You had to be, your waist had to be a certain size,
tiny.
You had to look like this. And, and I can remember multiple times coming home from college where my grandmother would say, I can tell you've put on weight. I hope you're not planning on staying that size, and what does that do?
I know. One comment can spiral a girl.
It undoes you. I remember showing up one time and it was like I had just a car trip and my grandmother looked at me and she was like, well, I wish that you still wore makeup. And I was like, I literally got in my car to drive home for Christmas. Like,
Aren't you happy to see me?
That's it. So I think that there are all these inadvertent things, and that's what I would really, and the thing is you can't break those. I look at the ways that I've had to heal and recover from my childhood, and like, only Jesus could have done that. Like it really is. And I think in the Bible, it's biblical where it's like there are things that only the blood of Jesus are going to be able to heal and restore and reconcile, because you can't will yourself out of it. You can't self-control yourself out of it. You can't discipline yourself out of it. Like it really is trusting him of like, I don't want to repeat this cycle and I can only do it by the grace of God.
So what were some of the places in you that you felt like needed the most healing, or that you can visibly see the progression? And was it a quick thing or did it take years?
I think it all took years. Like I think for me, when I look back, I see number one, and I write about this a lot in the book, where I think that I was on track to repeat a lot of the same things that my mom was, where I found my value in the way I looked and how much guys were attracted to me, and it was all out of insecurity, and I did a lot of where I could see where I was turning into a mean girl, because all I'd ever known is my mom kind of competed with me. And so I viewed other girls as my competition. So it was like I wouldn't like a guy until I found out that one of my friends liked him. And then I would decide, well, maybe I do like him. And maybe, there were things like that where you look back and go, oh my gosh, that was so toxic. But it was kind of what I had been raised with.
Right.
So it just seemed, and it was all, and I think that's why empathize even with the girls that were so mean to Caroline, where you look and go, you see, I know what it's come out of, is it's their own insecurities, because all of mine was so deep-seated in my own insecurities and feeling like, I feel like I had imposter syndrome. I can remember sitting in like church youth group in high school and feeling like if anybody really knew me, you know, because I think my own mom would say that, you know, she would say those things where if people really knew you, they wouldn't think you were so great.
Wait, your mom would say that to you? Maybe,
and so that...
Oh, Melanie. I guess this might be in the book. It's been a month since I read the book.
So it's kind of just, you know, that makes you, that shapes the way you look at yourself.
Well, and that brings up a whole other topic, because I know other people who have had mothers that were that hurtful. Like, how does that voice stay in your head? Has God helped you?
I think God has really, I think
that's a grace.
And I say that as a 53-year-old woman. So, you know, that looks a lot different because, but I think for a long time, I was always afraid to advocate for myself. I think I always felt like I lived in a way where I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because I felt like things with my mom, we would have this pattern where it felt like everything was okay for a while, and then the rug would get yanked out from under me, or she would unleash on me. So it just always felt like I was waiting for people to turn on me. So I think I didn't.
In other relationships.
Yes. I think Perry, we had this conversation. We've been married now for 27 years. So keep that in perspective. Like 2 years ago, we kind of had this conversation of what do you wish you had known earlier in marriage, or what would you change? And I was like, it dawned on me that I was like, it's been in the last 3 years where I really feel like I can speak up for myself when I don't agree with something.
Really?
Because I just I had been raised in such a way where I just wanted to keep it all tamped down. Like I didn't want an emotional explosion. I didn't want to have to deal with the conflict. You know, and I think that because I am a people pleaser, but so much of that is, I'm like, but how much of that was just the way that I was raised, where I just knew at any given time, if I said the wrong thing, there was going to be an explosion. If there was anything that I, you know, bucked against, it was going to end up being a huge thing. So I just learned to keep it all down. Right. And it's funny to me because that's, you know, Perry even said, he was like, have I ever made you feel like you couldn't like state your opinion or say whatever? And I'm like, no. And so it wasn't even anything he had done. Right. Or the way he had responded. It was just the way it was so ingrained in me that I was like, I just don't know how to advocate for myself, or how to say I don't like that decision, or I don't feel good about this, because I just wanted to keep everybody happy all the time.
Yeah, and don't you think, I think sometimes too, there's something about being like 50 and your kids being in college. I don't know if it's like we have more capacity. Yes. Sometimes I feel like I'm realizing more about myself like in the last year, because I never really had time to sit and think about it before. I was just in mom mode and doing things, but now you have more time just to reflect.
Yeah, and you think about it. And I had told Perry just in the last year, we laughed because he and Caroline are both overreactors. And it's always over like stupid things. You know, like if the back door lock gets jammed, they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is, you know, it's never over real stuff. It's over stupid stuff. Right. And I had to tell both of them, I was like, hey, y'all need to stop. I was like, it stresses me out every time. Like, I can't do the overreactions. And then Perry read an early copy of the book, and he was like, now that I've read this book, I get it. He said, I get why that sets you on edge, why it triggers you to like have that explosion, even if it's over something stupid, because just the way I'd always been raised, I dreaded the explosion, and I never knew when it was coming. But I do think when you get to be in your 50s, you have time to think about things. Yeah. And I think that
and then you said your mom passed away too.
Yes.
And so did that played a role? Do you think that played a role in your healing, or feeling like this was the time to get a therapy?
Yeah, and I think it was, because I think it all coincided. Because I think if my mom hadn't passed away, I wouldn't have written this book, because I knew I wasn't going to write it until she was gone. And that all happened really suddenly. So I think that gave me the freedom. But I think it also makes you start to look back kind of, you know, it was funny because after she died, people were like, are you sad? And I was like, it's almost like, I said, she hadn't been in my life for over 10 years. Right. I said, but there's a grief for what should have been, you know, that's or true. What could have been.
Well, let me ask you, because it's like when my mom passed away, it was weird. It's like all these memories, and Harry had the same thing with his dad, like memories that you just never thought about came to mind. Is it like that? Was it like that with your mom too?
I do think it's like that. And I think it's hard because, and you know, and I think I say this in the book, I think it's really hard because it wasn't all bad. Right. And I think that's what kept me holding on for so long. If you could just say, because I mean, I know there are people who are just in horrible relationships with their parents that have always been abusive, and maybe there's never been any good there.
Right.
And the thing is that there was good. There were times that we would have a great time, and it was fun, and she was funny and light, but you just never knew when it was going to turn, and when it turned, it was so bad. So you just always I lived in this kind of unknown.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think even now I'll stop and I'll remember, and I think that's the grace of God, where I'll remember something good. Like I'll remember
oh, that's good.
Like a moment where she did something sweet. And I do think because of the mental illness, I think she loved me to the best of her ability. Right. I just think she was a very broken person, and that makes me sad because I don't think she got the healing that she needed. Whether she didn't know how to or didn't want to or just couldn't. I don't know. But you see where whatever you don't allow God to heal is going to haunt you your whole life, because I just thought when she passed away, it was just sad at the end, where you're like, wow, this is not what the end of your life should look like.
Right.
So,
but you're bringing so much good from it. You really are. And this is going to help so many families.
I hope so. I mean, it really is the truth of God can restore anything that you trust him to restore.
Yes.
And it may not always be the path that you want it to be, or whatever, but I think there's so much power in using our stories and our experiences to say, you can do this too. You can create a healthy family. You can create a healthy, beautiful life, even if that wasn't necessarily your experience early on. So there's always beauty for ashes.
And I think, if there's, think of some of the takeaways for mom. I think one thing is, as moms, and this comes from being so rooted and confident in God's love for us, like unconditional, is that we cannot be scared to look at ourselves, because I always tell mom, like I talk about in Love Her Well, like, my daughter and I, the reason I wrote that book is because we went through this period where I was fighting and I would not own up to my mistakes. And really the bigger problem was me, and I was blaming it on her. And it's so hard to look at yourself. And then one day she told me, I was like, am I doing something to cause this gulf? And I thought she'd be like, no, Mom, you're perfect. Yeah, and she did not say that.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Then she was like, yeah, you're being harder on me. I feel like you're just being really hard to please. And, you hear these things and it feels like a punch in the gut. I think our deepest fear is that we're not a good mom. But I'm like, I would take that any day over losing a relationship with my child.
For sure.
And so, but I think as moms, we can be so insecure about our motherhood already that we can't take any feedback from our child or from anybody to think that we're not doing it right. And even I was talking to somebody recently at a school, and they were saying, we're talking about the new book, The Anxious Generation, and how I was like, I love that book. I think it's so good for these moms behind me, because they need to learn from mistakes. Wait to give their child a cell phone, wait to give social media. But they're like, a lot of these moms say, I just read that and it just makes me feel guilty. And I'm like, I don't feel good. I don't read that, and even though I could feel guilty because he's saying all these things that I wish I had known, I would have done it differently. But there's just two ways to look at it. And so I think with motherhood, instead of letting these things make us feel guilty, maybe I need to work on this issue so I don't pass it on to my daughter.
It is. And I think that's the whole thing, is there's so much grace in it. And I think at the times where I've had to tell Caroline, hey, I've only done this one time. And so I want to be perfect and I want to get it right, but I'm not going to. I mean, we had a thing yesterday. She called me because she's coming up here for the Auburn game. And I've been on her about, because I talk about vanity, but I'm like, hey, have you figured out your outfits? Do you know what you're bringing? Do you know what you're packing? Because I know how she is. She's a last-minute packer.
Right.
And she was like, I called you to let you know that I had done bad on this test, and I was so stressed out. And you were like, well, what skirt are you wearing to Auburn? And I was like, sorry. We're just all figuring it out.
Right.
And so you've got to give yourself grace, because I think the thing with, the social media stuff, where I look back now, and I'm like, why on earth did I let her get a cell phone in fifth grade? But I'm like, we didn't know it was the wild, wild west. Nobody was telling us these things. And so we were just like, well, this is what so-and-so did, so we're going to do the same thing.
Right. And I think don't you think the best thing to do with that, I would do it differently, is to go, okay, I'm going to help the moms behind me.
Yes.
And just knowing that we can't change our decisions, but you can do it differently moving forward.
Yeah, you can. And I think the biggest thing, too, is as mothers with daughters, I think that we think we're going to raise these many versions of ourselves.
Yes.
Because they're girls,
Yes.
so you think it's going to look a certain way. And I think
Yes.
the thing that became real apparent to me from pretty much the time Caroline was about a year old, where I was like, oh, she is nothing like me. Like, not in the way she views the world,
Yes.
not in the way, like the way that kid will fight and advocate for herself and just speak the truth. I mean, there are times that like she's saying something and I'm like holding on to the table like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's being this honest, you know?
love it.
But just to celebrate those things and to be like, look at what, an incredible person she is, and this is different than me, but to let them be fully themselves, because that's who God created them to be.
Exactly. And we need that personality for her generation.
That's it.
Like,
and
she's the kind of person that helps other girls be strong, and they need that.
Yeah. And I think they all work together, where you're like, everybody needs their unique personality.
Yes.
And I think they're never going to live a better life than when they are being true to who they were created to be, and not trying to fit in some box that sometimes maybe we want to have them fit in because it feels more comfortable to us.
Yes. So. And I don't know if you're like this with Caroline, but I'm like this with my kids, that sometimes it's the things that are so different than me, their parts of their personality, is what I admire most in them.
100%.
I'm like, man, I wish I was more. I wish I had more of that in me. But,
that's it. Like when I see her where she's like, no, I just said that was stupid and I'm not doing that or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I would have gone along with that forever. Like, and it makes me so proud. But sometimes don't you look at them and go, wow, how did you know to do that?
I know.
It's so interesting to watch them.
Yeah.
So.
That's when it's fun, because you see the Holy Spirit working in them. You're like, okay, God, you're teaching me through them.
Yeah, this is good.
Okay, Melanie, this has been the best conversation, and I cannot wait to share this message. And anything else that you would just share to, that you want to that we didn't cover, or that you want to tell the moms behind us, or the moms, I don't know, I guess there's two threads in your story.
Yeah.
Anything you want to tell the moms that, one, their daughter is struggling with a mean girl situation or a lonely season, or anybody who's struggling with that relationship with their mom.
Yeah. I mean, I think there'll be two things. So I will say, if you have a difficult relationship with your mom, and I feel like even once I just announced the book on Instagram and the theme, the amount of DMs I got from women saying, oh my gosh, like this was my relationship with my mom, or I related to that, but you don't feel like you can talk about it.
Right.
There again, especially if your mom is still living, you can't talk about it.
Right.
But what I will say is it is okay for you to protect your peace and for you to heal in the way that you need to heal, to make a new beginning. That's okay. And it doesn't mean, for me, it got to the point where I did have to walk away from that relationship. And that's not necessarily going to be everybody's story. And that's not necessarily the right thing. One of the things I say is, you don't ever walk away. I never was like, man, that feels awesome to not speak to my mom.
Right.
Like, that's not a fix either.
Right.
It was just what I had to do.
And I'm going to clarify too that this was like a 30-year, how old? You were...
Oh, I was 38 years old.
Yeah. So this was not like your mom voted for somebody differently than you. I'm going to go cut her out of my life. Yeah. Or some Instagram influencer told you to go cut her out.
It was a long
process
of forgiving and going back.
Trying to make it work.
Yes. And finally realizing, like, God has given me this family. He's given me Perry. He's given me Caroline. And I want to do this in a healthy way. And the only way I'm going to be able to be healthy is if I protect myself in this way.
Yes.
It was done with a lot of prayer and a lot of thought and a lot of intention. It was not a knee jerk, I got my feelings hurt and I'm out.
Right. Which is what I loved about your book. That is what makes it so timely for this day and age.
Because I think, there again, you can't just cut out everybody who, because I think God puts a lot of those people in our lives to refine us and to teach us things and all of that. So
had your mom responded differently, the story would have played out differently.
It could have played out different, but it just was never going to be different. Right. And so I think, number one, know you're not alone, and that God can use even that. If you will ask him to heal those places in you where you've been wounded, and where you've felt hurt, and maybe where you have bitterness over what you wish that could have been.
So good.
I think that's part of your story. And if you are a mom who has a daughter who is currently going through a mean girl season or is having a hard time with friends or all of that, I think I would encourage you to, number one, have accountability there. I think stay close to them, because a lot of times they're going to act like they want to push you away, and I think that's when they need you to draw even closer.
That's good.
And I think even one of the things I would say with Caroline, I was like, are we in an advice mode today, or am I just in a listening mode today? And so it's like, do you want to hear what I have to say, or are you just needing to vent?
Right.
But I think knowing you're going to get through it. It feels like at the time it's never going to be better. It feels like it's never going to be okay. But I think even in the hard things, trust what God is doing and creating in your child. Because I think very much it's the things that sometimes that we want to protect them from the most, or the heartbreaks we don't want them to have, that are the things that God is using to build them into who He's created them to be. And that's it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch the person that you love most in the world struggle, but who would they be without that struggle? So hang on and say a lot of prayers, but just know it's not always going to be that way. It's going to be all right.
Yeah. So you're raising a dragon slayer.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. We're all trying. We're all trying. But it is. We live in a world that is mean.
We do. And it's all, even friendships. I'm like, what should be their escape and place of comfort has become a major source of stress.
It is. And I think the challenge is how do you keep a child's heart soft?
Yes.
But also tough.
Yes.
And that's a real delicate dance. And honestly, I don't think without the help of the Holy Spirit, I don't know that we're equipped to do it.
No, I don't either. I don't either. And you raised such a good point that we haven't discussed was just discernment. Just to know, who can you be soft with? Like, who can you let down your guard with? And then who do you need to set up boundaries with? Like,
that's it.
I'm like, you can be polite, but you don't go share your secrets.
No.
You just got to have those boundaries there.
Yeah, and you've got to, and I think that's a skill, because I think we come into it as grown women knowing all the things that we know.
Right.
And I think it's okay to tell our girls, like, hey, you don't have to trust this person with your whole heart. Like, let's be smart and see who they're going to be. And Caroline and I even had very honest conversations where I was like, most teenage girls are not at their core going to be very great right now. Like, and it's not because they don't want to be, and it's not because they're not eventually going to be.
Right.
But there's an emotional and spiritual maturity that may not be happening here.
Right.
So just protect yourself a little bit.
Yes, it's true.
And that's okay.
Yeah,
that's
because
okay
they want to just go give their whole heart.
Yes.
And then sometimes they keep doing it even when they're getting hurt.
Yeah.
Like, no. Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay.
So, but hang on, it's all going to be okay. I know it doesn't feel like it's going to be okay, but I really look back and go, and Caroline would say it too, is I wouldn't trade any of it. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't trade any of it, because I think that God uses every single bit of it if we trust Him with it. So that would be my encouragement.
He's going to use it in a big way with her ministry and her having a new book coming out too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. We'll see.
And when does hers launch?
So hers comes out in August of 2025.
Okay.
So it's a 100-day. It's written like a devotional, but it is about facing your giants. And so she, I've read it. She wrote it.
So good.
And I will tell you that I read it with tears, just in all the ways where you're like, wow, like this.
And it's kind of, y'all's books are so similar. Like, they're going to put them on get them together.
It is. It's kind of an interesting.
How y'all going to have book signings together?
I mean, I guess we will. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's so funny. The things that you don't even, but like, it's
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to see, because I'm like, her story, it's almost like her book is kind of the continuation of the story of just what God did. And you can appreciate, like, as a mom, as I was reading some of the entries, I was like, I'm so glad I didn't know this at the time. Like, I'm so glad that I'm finding this out after the fact, because I would have been sick if I would have known this is how she felt at this time.
Right. So. God is good, and sometimes we don't need to know every little detail.
Yeah, we don't need to know it all. We don't need to know it all.
That's awesome. Okay, well, Melanie, you, like I said, this book is going to help so many people.
Thank you, Kari.
So thank you, and thank you for this conversation.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. Listen, you are such a good voice for all the girl moms out there.
Well,
so
that's why I'm such a big fan of this, because I know it's going to speak to like some of the biggest hurts and pains in their heart. So.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming.
All right.
Friends, thank you for tuning in today. I am so grateful to have you here. And if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave a ratings or review so that other people can find these messages too. For links to my books, my social media, and my new community on Substack, check out the show links. Thanks again for your support, and have a great day.